So, you think you know the story of the American Revolution? You know, the whole Tea Party, Paul Revere thing? Well, what if I told you that's kind of just the highlight reel? Today, we're going to dig deeper, go beyond the familiar stories, and explore the complex, messy, and fascinating way a nation was born. Let's get into it.
All right, let's just jump right in with a big one. Did Christopher Columbus really discover America? I mean, we all learned that rhyme in school. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But is that the whole story? Is it even true? The short answer? Nope, not even close.
Yeah, and this idea that Columbus landed on some new, empty world is a powerful story, but it's not the real story. The truth is, this land was already home to millions of people with their own complex societies and cultures. So his arrival wasn't a discovery. It was more like a massive collision of two worlds, and it kicked off an era of colonization that honestly changed everything. So why was he even out there sailing in the first place? You got to remember, Columbus wasn't looking for a new world. He was looking for a new way to get to the old one. See, in 1453, Constantinople fell, and that basically slammed the door on Europe's main trade route to Asia. Suddenly, countries like Spain and Portugal were in a frantic race to find another way to get to India and all its riches. Columbus had this kind of radical idea. Instead of going east, why not just sail west? Well, he didn't find India, obviously, but what he stumbled upon was, let's just say, a lot bigger. Okay, so that accidental discovery really opened the floodgates, right? It was like a Pandora's box of both opportunity and, well, a ton of conflict. In Columbus's wake, a huge wave of people started crossing the Atlantic. But who were they, and what on earth would make someone leave everything they knew behind to risk that dangerous journey?
First things first, let's ditch that idea of the colonies being just English. It was way more of a melting pot from the get-go. We're talking Dutch, Swedes, Germans, French, Scots, Northern Irish, all looking for a fresh start. And of course, a huge and absolutely crucial part of this story is the millions of enslaved Africans who were brought here by force. You just can't understand America without understanding that brutal reality.
And their reasons for coming? I mean, they were all over the map. Some were running from the constant wars in Europe. Others were escaping political or religious persecution. You even had people coming to avoid going to prison. It was this wild mix of hope, desperation, and ambition. And all of that created this fiercely independent mindset right from the start. These weren't people who felt a lot of loyalty to the old world they'd just left behind.
And the result of all these people pouring in, a population boom that was just staggering. Think about it. In only about 100 years, the colonial population exploded from roughly 250,000 to 2.5 million. That's not just growth. That's a tidal wave of humanity, and it was completely reshaping the continent.
So this human flood eventually carves out what we now know as the 13 colonies. But, and this is a huge but, they weren't expanding into an empty space. This growth came at a terrible price for the people who were already here. It meant the violent, forced displacement of Native Americans from lands they had lived on for centuries. You know, for a long time, Britain's control over the colonies was pretty hands-off. They kind of let them do their own thing. But that was all about to change, thanks to a war happening thousands of miles away. And here's the crazy irony. A huge victory for Britain would actually be the thing that planted the seeds for its own American rebellion. That conflict was the French and Indian War, which was really just one part of a bigger global war. Britain won, big time. But winning a war like that isn't cheap. They were left with an absolutely massive debt. We're talking over 130 million pounds, which was an astronomical amount of money back then. So how do you pay off a debt that big? Well, Parliament looked across the ocean at the colonies and thought, aha! They started hitting them with a whole series of new taxes and rules. It was like one thing after another. The Sugar Act, the Currency Act, the Quartering Act. I mean, can you imagine being forced to house and feed soldiers in your own home? For a lot of people, the last straw was the Stamp Act. Suddenly, you had to pay a tax on pretty much every piece of paper you used.
And look, this wasn't really about the money. It wasn't about a few extra pennies on a newspaper. It was about the principle of the thing. The colonists had zero say, zero voice in the British Parliament that was levying these taxes.
This led to a rallying cry that you've definitely heard before, and it united everybody. Taxation without representation.
That's a powerful phrase, right? But slogans can only get you so far. All that anger and resentment that had been simmering under the surface for years, well, it was about to boil over. Things were about to get violent.
And the flashpoint was, of course, Boston. A super tense confrontation between angry colonists and British soldiers just explodes. Shots are fired into the crowd, and when the smoke clears, you have what was immediately called the Boston Massacre. That name alone tells you everything. It became this powerful symbol of British cruelty.
5 people. That's the number. 5 colonists lay dead. Now, the soldiers were later acquitted in court, but honestly, it didn't matter. The damage was done. The image of redcoats firing on civilians was burned into everyone's minds. It felt like a line had been crossed, you know? There was no going back from that.
The next big moment of defiance is one we all know. We're talking about the Boston Tea Party. Late one night, a bunch of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, snuck onto British ships and just started chucking crate after crate of valuable tea right into the harbor. It was this incredibly bold, symbolic protest, and it was going to have some serious consequences.
So how did Britain respond? Did they try to de-escalate? Nope. They came down hard. They passed a series of laws the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, designed to make an example of Boston and crush their rebellious spirit. But, and this is key, it had the exact opposite effect. It backfired, big time. Instead of scaring the other colonies into line, it united them. Britain had just turned a Boston problem into an American crisis.
Yeah, those intolerable acts, that was really the point of no return. The debate was over. The colonies were now united against the common enemy, and they were ready to do the unthinkable, make a final, complete break from Great Britain.
And things move fast. I mean, really fast. In 1774, the First Continental Congress organized a boycott. By 1775, the second one was already preparing for war. And then, just 1 year later, on July 4th, 1776, they signed the Declaration of Independence. Think about that audacity. They were formally telling the biggest empire on the planet, we're done, we're on our own.
Of course, declaring independence is one thing. Winning it is another thing entirely. I mean, this was a brand new, scrappy nation going up against a global superpower. And somehow, against all odds, they pulled it off. A lot of that was down to the incredible leadership of General George Washington. But they also had a secret weapon, a crucial ally, France. Britain's old enemy saw a perfect chance to stick it to them and jumped in with money and military support.
So after years of brutal fighting and sacrifice, it all came down to this: the Treaty of Paris in 1783. This was the official document. This was the moment where Great Britain formally looked at the United States of America and said, okay, you win. You are your own independent country. The impossible had actually happened.
So, when you step back and look at it all, it's a wild story, isn't it? It starts with a guy looking for a shortcut to India and ends with the birth of a whole new nation built on this ideal of liberty. But it was messy, it was complicated, and it was full of contradictions. And that really leaves us with a big question, one that's still relevant today. How should we tell the story of a nation's beginning? Because the parts we choose to highlight and the parts we choose to forget say a lot about who we are right now.